Hi there, welcome to the latest of our Thursday coronavirus questions videos. We've been trying week by week to ask and seek to answer some questions that folks have, particularly at this time of COVID-19, with all of the issues and problems and dilemmas that it throws up. Today we are asking a very serious and fundamental question, and it's this: what can Christianity say to those who are suffering? I imagine this is one of the top questions that many people have in their minds at the present time. Suffering, pain, difficulty, disease, death, bereavement, all of these things have become a very vivid reality to us in the wake of the global crisis that's been unfolding. And among all the anxieties and questions that we might harbour and that we might have, one is with regard to God and suffering. We can have all kinds of questions in that regard. We can have big philosophical questions about how a good God can allow suffering. We can also have deeply pastoral questions about what difference the message of the gospel and the message of God has for me if my heart is hurting and my circumstances are sore. And so today I want to try to answer that question a little bit, conscious that it's not possible in a 5 or 6 minute video to do justice to the whole biblical picture, nor to the whole pastoral picture of where your heart might be today. What can Christianity say to those who are suffering? Rebecca McLaughlin, in her recent book Confronting Christianity, writes a brilliant chapter on the issue of the Christian faith and suffering. What she does there is so disarming, because she contrasts what Christianity has to say with what other major belief systems say as well. And so she takes atheism, with its merely material view of the universe, with its idea that life is random, meaningless, that we are just biology, and that our anthropology is governed by that, and that certainly there's no theology to palliate the suffering that we face. And so we live in a random universe where suffering is simply part of evolutionary processes that brings about other desirable outcomes. And so we end up in a situation which is pastorally bereft, which is insensitive to the difficulties that our hearts face, and that ultimately engenders hopelessness, disappointment with life, wondering where we can really find answers to our big questions. It gives us a stark horizon with no hope beyond it. Rebecca McLaughlin also contrasts the Christian view of suffering with that of Buddhism, which doesn't sideline suffering but seeks to detach itself from it, finding itself in a place of separation from the difficulty and the pain of the world. And ultimately, again, that is uncomfortable, and it also is unsatisfying in terms of looking at our world. We have to encounter suffering. Our hearts have to be open to the difficulty and the pain of others. The poet William Blake asked the question in one of his poems, can I look on another's suffering and not be in sorrow too? And that's true. We can't achieve that nirvanic state of being separated from the suffering and the pain of others. And then the Christian message comes in to the world of suffering. I want to say two things about that today to you. One is this, that Christianity speaks with sensitivity to the sufferer. It's so important, if you're suffering today, that you don't listen to a video like this and imagine that we're into cheap shots or into trite answers. There are issues that we face in our lives which are intractable, which are irreducible in the dimensions that they have. There are pains and pressures, bereavements, losses, difficulties that there are no ready or quick answers to. And so if your heart is hurting today, I want to say to you that the Christian message gives room for hurt. It gives room for pain. It even gives room for honest questioning about where God might be when we suffer and we struggle. And so Psalm 13 is a prime example of that in the Old Testament, where the psalmist cries out to God, how long will you be silent? How long will you forget me? Why do you not see what's unfolding? That's a common refrain in the Psalter. This honest outpouring of a heart to a good God, saying, if you're good, why God? Why all this pain and why all this difficulty? And the beauty of it is that very often the Bible's treatments of those kinds of suffering don't give us the pat answers, don't give us the ready-made formula or rubric. They give us a picture of human existence which is fraught with difficulty and fraught with pain. And it gives us hearts and souls that erupt in painful enunciations and deeply difficult questions in the face of that. And so if you're a suffering person today, if this coronavirus crisis or other crises in your life have brought you to a place where you feel so despondent and you even feel you're struggling with God, let me invite you to take the Bible and read the book of Psalms and find there balm for your soul. Find there like-minded people who likewise struggled and suffered. You could read the book of Job and you could find there a man who suffers even though he is externally righteous in how he lives his life, even though he's a God-fearer. You can find there in Job's complaint so much grounds for speaking to God in the midst of difficulty, and also so much philosophy that you can reject, that suffering is necessarily a result of something that you've done wrong or something that you've invited into your life. The scriptures can also speak satisfactorily, not just sensitively to sufferers, but satisfactorily to the issue of suffering. I want to say that Christianity can speak to suffering in a way which no other worldview can. Christianity can speak to the causes of suffering. We proclaim a good God and a righteous God in whom there's no injustice. And if that seems at odds with the world that we're living in today, with the pain and difficulty that beset us, man-made problems, natural disasters, illnesses and viruses, the Bible gives a deeply satisfying answer to that. Because when the Bible talks about sin and the entrance of sin into the world, it doesn't merely talk about Adam and Eve as mere individuals, but as Adam, as the head of humanity, introduced in his disobedience a principle which permeates all of creation, every human being and even the non-human world. We are living now in the wake of Eden in a deeply fallen world where we're subject to the briars and the thorns, the slings and the arrows of a world which is profoundly adrift from what it was created originally to be. And so the entrance of sin into the world, into the very fibre of the physical universe, gives us answers to some of the pain we feel when we see a broken world. It shows us what sin does, and it shows us where suffering comes from. But the principle of sin being brought into the world, this grand scheme narrative that permeates the very soil, permeates the very fabric of the world that we live in. So the Bible gives satisfying answers about suffering because it tells us about its causes, but it also tells us about the great treatment for suffering. In the Lord Jesus Christ, we find one who has suffered. The Son of God came into the world, and in his flesh he suffered. He suffered right to the point of yielding up his life to death. And so we have in the Lord Jesus Christ one who understands us and sympathizes with us in our weakness. But we also have one who has come to solve sin. One who has come not merely to make new creatures of the hearts and minds of men and women, but to make a whole new creation, a new heavens and a new earth, which has no more pain and no more suffering and no more tears, where the outflow of Adam's sin will be reversed, where all that's wrong will come untrue, where justice will be served to injustice, where peace will be given in the place of conflict, where solace will be given in the place of suffering. And the Bible also shows us satisfactorily that when we suffer now, we do so not in a pointless, random universe, hopelessly spinning out of control. Not, as W.B. Yeats said in his poem, The Second Coming, that the falcon can no longer hear the falconer, that the world is drifting away from us and we're helpless. But it gives us a view of suffering which says if we put faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, then that robust view of suffering helps us, but also his presence through suffering gives us the grace to endure. So the Apostle Paul could talk in Romans 8 about the fact that all things are working together for good because God in his providence is working even through the brokenness of our sinful world for the good of his people and the glory of his name. So if we have Christ and we have salvation, we have something which is imperishable, something that can never be taken away from us, and we have an inseparable union with Jesus that gives us joy even in our difficulties. So Paul could say in 2 Corinthians 1 that God comforts us in all our troubles so that we might in turn comfort others. So what can Christianity to say to someone that's suffering? It can say so much by way of sensitivity. It can say so much that is satisfactory. It can show us the causes of sin. It can show us the great cure for sin in the Lord Jesus Christ and the suffering that follows that sin. So if you're not a Christian today, I want to invite you not to see suffering as a stumbling block to belief, but to see it as a great entrance point into a gospel which gives substantial answers to the issues that you face. And if you are a believer today and you're suffering, we have this great assurance that the sufferings of this present time don't compare to the glory that will be revealed in us. And so we trust. William Cowper was a hymn writer. He was a poet. He also suffered terribly from depression. And he wrote a beautiful hymn that I'm going to read as I close this little video shot today. It's a peace which is so filled with beauty and with reality. God moves in a mysterious way, Cowper says, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps on the sea and rides upon the storm. Deep in unfathomable minds of never-failing skill, he treasures up his bright designs and works his sovereign will. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust him for his grace behind a frowning providence. He hides a smiling face. His purposes will ripen fast, unfolding every hour. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan his work in vain. God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain. In Christ, we find sensitivity to our suffering. We find satisfactory answers to our suffering. If you've never thought that through before, come and explore it and find in the Christian gospel a message which accounts for suffering, but that also counters suffering in the work of the Lord Jesus Christ. May the Lord bless you today. Thank you for listening.